Alrighty, guys, welcome back to another episode in this look back at the 2021 NFL Draft. This episode is going to be the NFC East, and before we get into the Eagles draft, just a little disclaimer, same one as the other episodes, that we are not professionals and that we did not watch game film for every single one of these players, so bear with us if our grades are ever so slightly inaccurate, and do enlighten us in the comments if you see something that we just could not see while we were looking at stat sheets rather than actual game film. But we'll start it off with the Eagles. And in the first round, pick 10, they took Devontae Smith, who has just exploded onto the field. He was really good his rookie year. And even though they added A.J. Brown after his rookie year, he took a step up. And I think that's extremely impressive to be a wide receiver one and kind of have that not necessarily lacking season, but be a wide receiver one, put up solid stats, and then become a wide receiver two and get better.
Yeah. Um, Year to year, he saw like insane increase in just like targets and completions. Yeah, year one, 64 receptions. Year two, 95. I don't know what happened, really. Yeah, he's up against DB2s, but also he should be getting a lot less looks because he's no longer the main guy. They just really managed to like scheme them together. The chemistry with him and Hertz developed really well, and he he's a big he's a big reason I think Jalen is why Devontae even is able to hit these marks because with the development of Jalen, Devontae Smith was right there with him equally improving and seeing the benefits of Jalen.
I think that not only was it Jalen Hurts developing and getting better, but it was also him not having to go against the CB1. Like you mentioned, it's not always a good thing when you switch from wide receiver one to wide receiver two because you do see that dip in targets. But when you're built like Devontae Smith, where you're typically not going to be this giant, big, go get it guy, and A.J. Brown certainly is, they're very different receivers. And if you've got that, you can kind of take advantage of a not necessarily lower target count, but you can take advantage of the situation that you're in with a quarterback that's getting better and a offense that's just becoming more dominant. So the defenses that you're going against are spread a little bit more because
Mm-hmm.
everybody's a threat. Um,
Yeah, he's no longer going to get bracketed and locked down. He's going to be able to just kind of have the one man or the zones to kind of read, figure it out, and find his place in. Um, just some little stats to throw in. This past season, he was ninth in receiving yards, 16th in receiving TDs, 11th in receptions, and that's not even as the main guy on his team. Their offense was insane this year, and rushing and passing. I gave Devonte Smith an A. I can't really see any I can't harp on it too much because I imagine there's not going to be much pushback on making that an A.
yeah, I had an A on him as well. The only knock I had on him, or the only thing that could be considered a knock, is that the Eagles taking him at 10 let Dallas get Micah Parsons 2 picks later. But, I mean, that'd be a bigger knock if Devonte Smith didn't pan out and
Yeah,
Micah Parsons like one defensive player of the year, which neither has happened so far. So I'm good with an A on him.
yeah, it's more of a knock just because it made their rival better. But at the same time, if Devonte Smith goes to the Cowboys,
Yeah,
then
that's true too. I mean, then Dak's got another weapon and he just becomes more dominant and
yeah.
you know.
Moving forward, we got in round two, pick 37, we have Landon Dickerson. Landon Dickerson is in a class where I would argue this draft class has been pretty good offensive line wise. Um, Down the board, we find guys that are still getting reps, still starting, and in this first round, save Alex Leatherwood and maybe a handful of other names. Um, there's always been some good offensive linemen throughout every round, I think, and so getting him in the second round is pretty good. He led the league in penalties, which isn't good, but he's also a really good run blocking guy, and penalties are going to come on run blocking reps. So it's up and down for me. What are your thoughts?
So basically exactly what you just said, where you're getting a really solid O lineman in the second round, and maybe he does have those 14 penalties, and that's a bad look. But when you're on an offense where your quarterback is a rushing threat, you've got a rotating backfield that's a rushing threat, and you also have to protect for your quarterback in the passing offense, and you're being asked to do all these things, no matter if you're on the outside or on the inside as a guard or a tackle, whatever. You're gonna pick up penalties, and 14 is a lot. It's a very considerable amount. It's nothing to laugh at or be like, it's no
Yeah.
big deal. But that can always be polished up. I had the same argument with a different O lineman. I don't remember who it was in one of our other videos. Um, but I like the pick, and you had said there's a lot of good offensive linemen. I think there's a lot of good value at offensive line in this
Yeah.
draft. I think that it's not necessarily that there were a ton of starting caliber offensive linemen, more
Mhm.
so the players that were taken in the third through sixth rounds or so that were offensive linemen. Some of them panned out and actually got some starting reps when starters went down or whatever. So I think it was really good value. I think Dickerson was amazing value as well because that O line was so strong with their QB sneak push. Uh, that was so obnoxious to watch. But hey, they could do it, and if nobody else tried it, then clearly they're doing something right. I had an A minus on him. I think that as a player and as the value, he is an A, but the penalties knock him down to an A minus for me.
Yeah. Originally, just looking at my old grade, I had a B. I don't understand why I went that low on him. Just because he started majority of like over 90% both years, and then on top of that, he made the Pro Bowl in year two. So I will match that with an A minus.
Yeah, I think that that offensive line is. I think the entire offense is just the reason they're so successful. Like it's an easy thing to say, oh, it's a dominant offense, but when you've got no real weaknesses, like what you've got Jalen Hurts, a phenomenal quarterback. You've got Miles Sanders, who is a good rotational running back. Nothing crazy. He's no Saquon. He's no Nick Chubb, but he's good. Then you've got Devontae Smith and AJ Brown. There's no weaknesses in the receiving room. You've got Dallas Goedert at tight end, and then you've got this star-studded offensive line. And I think that just everything meshing together was what led to them working out and making the Super Bowl.
Yeah, they've moved on from Miles now, and probably DeAndre is their starter.
I would
Um,
imagine. Have to
yeah,
imagine.
DeAndre is their starter, but yeah, their offense is not getting any worse. So I think they're trying to make a good run here, years and years in a row for that Super Bowl ring.
I think they're more of a uh, like the move from Miles Sanders to DeAndre Swift is more of a lateral move.
Yeah,
It's not stepping up, it's not stepping down. You're getting a player who's going to give you just about the same thing. And, maybe he's utilized better than he was in Detroit, and he does become way better than Miles Sanders was. But I think Miles Sanders was pretty good. I think DeAndre Swift is pretty good. So we'll move on from discussing the Eagles and move on to their third round pick. At 73, they took Milton Williams, a defensive lineman. Their D line is the biggest rotating part of that team, and so there's like you can have your starters and you can look at a depth chart and say, okay, these guys are starting, but everybody gets reps. And Milton started in 36% of defensive snaps as a backup, and in the third round, you're getting a solid rotational player on a team that is already pretty strong everywhere. He had 4 sacks this past season. I gave him a B.
yeah, he's the third D tackle in terms of snap count for the team throughout both years. He was third. Um, he actually produces out of that spot where he's got his 12 quarterback hits, 15 TFLs, and 6 career sacks. All of those are career stats, FYI. He, he could see less snap count going forward just because they continue to bolster their D line, and he might just fall back a little bit down on that rotation. So right now I have him at a B minus.
I think that the only thing that has me agreeing with you and taking it down to a B minus is the fact that they drafted Jalen Carter, so there's just going to be even more competition at that D tackle spot. And who knows, maybe he bumps out and takes an edge rushing spot. Maybe he does something else on that defense, but I'll go B minus right now just because of the lack of a positive looking future.
All right, starting us off in the next round, round four, pick 123, Zach McPherson, DB. This was the first kind of falter for them, where they draft him fourth round guy, and Defensively, he sees 278 snaps, and he's primarily a special teamer. Um, when he's on the field, he's allowed 50% catch rate, roughly, 136 yards, 23 targets. He's he's versatile. They're so good of a team, so it's hard to like knock him for lack of seeing him on the field. So right now I have him at a C minus, but I could go lower.
I had him at a straight C, but with the way I've graded other mainly special teamers, I'll go with a C minus. I could see a D plus, but I think that because he's been solid when he's been on the field, and he's just kind of stuck behind that stellar Philly defense, I think that that kind of gives him that pass and gets him up to a C minus from a D plus.
Right, moving forward in round five, pick 150, Kenneth Gainwell, running back. Um, Kind of similar to what we just spoke about last episode in terms of a running back allowing another running back to not get paid, but that could be the case here. Kenneth Gainwell has been a relief back for Miles Sanders. He's going to continue to, well, maybe he'll make a push for that starting role, but most likely he's going to continue that backup role to DeAndre Swift. And he's gotten to he's gotten mild looks on seeing the field that offense. And he's gotten 9 rushing TDs career wise. He's part of a big group of late round running backs that always manage to somehow see the field. That's just where they're valued at in the late rounds. He's not done anything phenomenal, but he's been a good, consistent number two. I went C plus, but I could be convinced on going higher.
So I actually went B for basically the exact same reason. You take a running back as a third stringer. He hasn't missed a game through 2 seasons. He averages 4.5 a carry. He's just a solid rotational guy, and it's the fifth round, so that's what you're kind of looking for. He's going to stay in that third running back role, though. He's not going to move up to second on the depth chart because they got Rashad Penny, and he is most certainly going to be that RB2 when healthy. And I think that having a guy like Kenneth Gainwell and then a guy like Boston Scott behind him as injury insurance for injury prone running backs like Rashad Penny is a good thing. Kind of like my Elijah Mitchell take last video where we were talking about he was basically just injury insurance for CMC now going forward because the Niners brought in CMC, but he's damn good injury insurance for a fairly injury prone running back. Um, just because of the signing of Rashad Penny, I could see like a B minus if you want to bridge the gap between the two grades.
Yeah, we'll go B minus just because he hasn't stepped into a bigger role, but he's going to just consistently be that role for them.
And then going onward, one round later, round six, pick 189, we got Marlon Tipolodu. He's a D tackle, another part of that rotating D line, but very, very, very much less efficient than Milton Williams taken earlier. It's really hard to hold it against him when you look at how many players are on that D line, but still, there's always room for, especially in a rotating defensive line like the Eagles have, there's always room to jump in and make an impact, and he just kind of hasn't so far. I had him at a straight C.
Yeah, his. I also had him at a straight C, and he's been kind of floating around fourth, fifth D tackle. Yet he still gets to see those snaps due to their rotating nature they got going. He's played in 14 games, which you know it's a 6 round pick, so I think that that's good. And he's produced, but I don't think significantly enough to move that up to being a C plus, especially again when you consider Jalen Carter and everyone's just moving down in terms of snap count thanks to the addition of him.
And they did move on from Javon Hargrave this offseason, so there is going to be a little bit of an opening, but Jordan Davis is going to be filling that gap very nicely along with Jalen Carter. So I wouldn't be surprised to see a little bit less rotation if Jordan Davis and Jalen Carter can stay healthy and active. But if we do continue to see that, maybe Tipolodu moves up the rotation a little bit with the move on from Hargrave. But we'll probably see a pretty similar role. And then 2 picks later in the sixth round, still we got Taron Jackson, defensive end. He played a little bit in his rookie year. His usage percentage just dipped in year two, and he's basically not a contributor anymore. He spent most of last year on the practice squad. I've got him as a pretty easy D just because he's still with the team.
Yeah, he's gotten a little bit of production, but again, there's no real upside looking forward in terms of snap counts increasing or anything like that. I'll meet you with that straight D. Originally had him at a D plus.
I am looking at their depth chart at the end right now. He's the third on the left side, so he's at the highest, the fifth D end on the depth chart. Maybe a little higher because Derek Barnett's questionable, but yeah, basically he's far enough down the depth chart that he's probably not going to see too much action, and he's hasn't shown that much so far. And then we're on to further down in the sixth round, Jacoby Stevens at pick 224. This is an easy F. He played in 2 games his rookie season and then got released.
In round 7, pick 234, just 10 picks after that last pick, is Patrick Johnson at the end for them. He's a significant special teams like contributor, and he also has a significant 20% snap count for the defense. And coming out of the second round, it's kind of, you know, kind of fodder to just be not really seeing the field. But I think with him, mainly special teamer, but when he does get those snaps, he, he's part of that like rotational guy. I think I gave him a C plus just for that extra little bump over being on the roster, but he could go higher if you had him higher.
I actually had him at a C minus, giving him the bump up from a D because he is still on the roster. He only really takes snaps on special teams, and I can't really give anybody you know a really good grade because they're a special teamer. But I can definitely see that he's not the worst pick you could have had in the seventh round. He's actually, even if it's only on special teams, he is making an impact on the team. He took 20% of snaps on defense last year
Yes,
that he
second
was able
year,
to.
yep.
So that's a better number than most special teamers, but I don't see myself going too much higher than a C.
All right, I'll meet you at a C for him.
Cool, cool. And overall, my grades really didn't change too much on the Eagles. Initially, I had graded them an A minus because they had 3 hits in the first 3 picks, and it's really tough to grade them because they're drafting so much depth with the strength of their team already being so high. So it's kind of hard to be like, oh, this guy hasn't made an impact, and it's you look at their depth chart and you realize, yeah, he kind of can't. Uh, so I think I'm giving more of a pass to the guys in the later rounds than I normally would, just because there's no real room for improvement, I guess.
Yeah, I had them at a B plus, but I see the argument where like they have such a rotational thing at D line, and they also drafted one, two, three, four D linemen. So when we have lower grades on those guys, it could also just be a product of the system and not so much like, oh, they're not producing. Like they're seeing the field on defense, so what more can we really ask for? Um, yeah, they got the two A's right off the bat. I think I had them at a B plus. I'll match that. I'll go A with all the um, caveats of
A minus.
the
But
defensive line having there. Yeah, A minus.
yes, I think that in a couple years, I think this is another weird team where we really haven't seen their full draft and their full potential yet. The guys who were ready to start right off the bat did, and they performed well, and the guys who were drafted as depth pieces to be future rotational D linemen or running backs or, you know, players on this rotational team, I think that they're they're gonna show us in due time, and so I think it's one that we can't fully grade yet. The only very clear miss was Jacoby Stevens, where he only played 2 games, then got dropped. So we'll move on from the Eagles, go on to the Giants, who in the first round at pick 20 decided Kadarius Toney was their option. And this is going to be one of the weirder grades of the draft because he was a first round pick who didn't really produce on the Giants. He was very injured and demanded a trade, and that was essentially his Giants highlights. Um, he then went on to the Chiefs, where he made an impact on a Super Bowl roster, and he's going to have a bigger role this next season. And when you look at his raw potential and the moves he makes on the field and his route running and everything, it's electric to watch. But he just he kind of didn't do much for the team that drafted him.
Yeah, he's got a significant lack of hamstrings in his legs to pull off the things he does. Um, I, just a note is that he played in just 10 games. He started four his rookie year, and yet somehow he still led the team in receptions, and was also second on the team for yardage. Um, this this is a draft pick, not just weird because he was traded away. Um, he was traded away for a third and a sixth round pick, and then the third round became Darren Waller. So it's such an odd thing where you're getting a first round pick that equates to the value of a third and a sixth, but then one of the it's a sixth and Darren Waller. It's very odd in this pick.
Yeah, and the sixth actually did become a cornerback in the 2023 draft, so he's already on the team. So that sixth is no longer just a pick; it's a player. Uh, and I think the
But
difficulty
then
here,
again, we haven't seen that player play at the NFL, so I just kind of valued it still at the sixth round pick.
I think the difficulty here is that we haven't seen either of those players do anything for the Giants. Darren Waller is
Yeah,
coming off of a very injured season where he did not put up typical Darren Waller numbers, and I think that if Darren Waller comes out and is back to his self from like 3 years ago, I think would be his
yeah,
peak right around. If
and
he
yeah,
goes back to that level, I think that this then becomes a great pick for the Giants because they turned this late first round pick into a tight end who's going to help Daniel Jones compete. And then if this corner pans out as well, then they've turned this first round pick into two solid players. But as of right now, because of the speculation we have to make, I went with a C minus.
yes. I had it at a C minus as well. It's so odd because it's just been kind of like F or D minus if you're not on the team anymore. But with him, it's very interesting because they managed to. It's so odd that he produced so much for them while being so hurt.
Yeah,
That just goes to show how terrible they were that year, and how lacking their wide receivers were. But yeah, C minus.
so I don't think I really took into account his impact on the team. I'm still at a C minus on him, but the fact that he was able to lead them in receptions while only appearing in 10 games is kind of nuts. Um, they did have a very weak receiver room, but still kind of crazy. We'll move on to a much brighter note with Aziz Ojulari in the second round at pick 50. He had 8 sacks in his rookie season. That was the most a Giant has ever had in their rookie season. And then he got injured in his second year, only appeared in 7 games, but he put up 5.5 sacks in those 7 games. So when on the field, he is electric. He is a very good edge rusher, linebacker, whatever you want to call him. I had a B plus on him.
Yeah, I had him at a B, kind of just like considering injury. I didn't actually look into and see that he was, breaking records as a rookie for the franchise. But um, I'll meet you at a B plus just because he's gotten a lot of forced fumbles. He's gotten 13 and a half career sacks. Like he's his usage dropped year two, and that's probably just some rotation stuff, injury. That's Kayvon Thibodeau being there. It's a lot of stuff, but he's still going to be projected to start for them, so it's no worries really. Looking at all of the lesser snap counts there, so B plus.
I, th- I also I also think that with him only being injured for like half of one of the seasons, it's a little bit better than having 2 injuries in 2 years where you don't have the toughness to play a full season. He proved that he did with his rookie year, where he was performing at a high level and he was in every game. Uh, but then, obviously, unfortunate injury. I think in the future he'll be a little bit maybe higher graded. It's kind of hard to go up from a B plus, but when you're in the second round, you get a solid edge rusher. I think it's easy to say that when they're on the field, when they're making impacts, they're a really good player.
Moving forward into the third round here, pick 71, Aaron Robinson. Um, he's not really seen the field too much, just 340 snaps, and 260 of those were in his rookie year. Uh, so definitely a step back on his snap count year to year. He's he's produced. He's allowed one TD. He's broken up 4 passes, allowed a 33% completion percentage last season. But then again, it's all of these things considered. But that was a sample size of only being targeted 6 times. So I'm giving him a slight benefit of the doubt, and I gave him a C plus.
So I kind of looked into why he was missing those games. He was out 15 games this past season with injury. So he was only able to appear in 2 games, and he really wasn't seen too much through those 2 games. But in his rookie season, he showed out. He had 3 passes defended and 26 total tackles in 2 starts, only 9 games played. And I gave him a C because, a true grade will be found in the future. We're just not there yet. We don't know what he's done yet. I am okay bumping that up to a C plus though, because you're getting
I
a.
honestly, I'll argue back to keep it at a C simply because his current roster spot, he is the fourth right side corner, so seventh to eighth,
Who
and
is who is ahead of this man? Hold on.
they got Deontay Banks, Dory Jackson, Darnay Holmes, Cordero Flott, Trey Hawkins, Alex, or sorry, that's the wrong. Nick McLeod, Amani Oruwariye. So some competition there.
Man, I hope. Well, depth charts obviously aren't final yet. We haven't even played a preseason game,
Yeah.
so obviously he can move up the depth chart. I'm wondering if it's just because it was a big injury. Obviously, they took him out for 15 games. They're probably just being a little bit cautious with his snap counts projecting. Uh, but yeah, we'll stick with a C on him and move swiftly onward to the fourth round, pick 116, where they took Ellerson Smith, a defensive lineman. He had 11 total tackles, no tackles for loss, no sacks, and several injuries in only 2 seasons. I did not like the pick. I gave him the same grade that I gave everybody else that was not very good, but stayed with the team, and that is a D.
He got a D for me, and it's not something I check for every single player I graded, but this one was a. He is graded horrendously on PFF. If you want to give me a second to pull it up, we have Ellerson Smith here off of PFF. 29.9. It's phenomenal
That's
how
funny.
poorly he's graded off of that.
That's funny. Well, also, he didn't accrue any stats in 2022,
Yeah.
so that's probably why. In 2021, he was given a much more favorable 57.4. Actually, I don't know if I would say much more favorable, but uh, also, PFF may be really off, but they have his tackle total at 4, and PFR, if I read it correctly, had his tackle total at 11. So I'm gonna double check that real quick.
It did have his combined tackles at 11 for his career.
Yeah, I had him with 8 in his rookie
So
season and 3 this past season. Um, yeah, I'll always trust
I
PFR
probably
over.
value like assists differently.
No, PFF doesn't track total tackles; it tracks solo and assists. And it says he has
Hmm.
1 solo, 3 assists this past season, and nothing else. Or sorry, his rookie season and nothing else. Where PFR has him at 2 solo and 6 assists on his rookie season, and then one
One
solo,
and
two
two.
assist in his second year. I think that I will stick at a D, and the only reason I'm staying away from a D minus is because he forced a fumble in his rookie season.
Yeah. Honestly, we can probably cut out all of the stuff about us talking about PFR.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Moving forward. Moving forward here, we have in the sixth round, pick 196, Gary Brightwell. Um, he's a special teamer for him for the team, and he's gotten an average of 4.5 a carry. He's gotten some yardage for them offensively, and he's about an average return man when you look at his kick returns. He was 10th in the league last season for the yardage on those, and he's not huge offensively. He's not huge special teams wise. I gave him a C plus just for the little bit of stats he's accrued, and out of the sixth round, just that little bump for that.
Yeah, I was at a B on him. Looking back at his stats, I think a C plus is much more accurate. My defense for him was that he's on a team with Saquon, so the running back opportunities are going to come very few and far between. He's a 3 down back. He's only going to be out when he's either tired or injured, and The fact that he was able to get 31 attempts and put up 4.5 yards a carry on those 31 attempts and get a touchdown, it's impressive. He appeared in all 17 games, but didn't start in any of them. And I think he did solid, but looking back on it and how I've graded other players, I think C plus is right around correct for him.
And then picked just 5 picks later in the 6th round, we have Rodarius Williams, a corner. He has a very, very slim amount of 197 defensive snaps to his name throughout the career. He's got one interception, he's allowed one TD, and has allowed a 75% completion percentage. In the 6th round, that's, I would say, performing slightly below expectation. I had him at a C minus. D plus is also applicable for me.
So I mentioned that he had been placed on IR 3 separate times over his first 2 seasons, and only played in 8 total games. Only played in 3 games last year. He put up 5 tackles a game when he did play last year, which is pretty solid. And I think if they can get some healthy runs out of him, he can be a solid player. But the fact that he's been on IR 3 times in 2 seasons is not a good look. I think C minus is generous, but I'll agree with it there. I had a C on him, and I've just looked back on it and disagreed with myself. So
uh, Alrighty, well, locking that in as the final pick for them. Um, they we really didn't talk highly of anyone they selected other than Aziz. I gave them a C minus, and even looking at it now, that's very generous. So I'm gonna go ahead and dock their final grade down to just a D plus. They drafted a, they used a 1st round pick on someone that wasn't gonna, that didn't stay there, was too injury prone for them to value to keep, and they've gotten people that have been just very injured, very rarely staying the field, and then they also got Zizo Jalari. So it's an interesting group, but nothing too great.
I, for whatever reason, had them graded at a B minus. I said that they had no huge home run picks, and there were 3 picks that haven't completely fleshed out yet. And that makes this draft very tough to grade, especially with the Kadarius Toney trade and everything, where we haven't seen the end of that at all. Uh, and you can't really say they did terribly, but after review, the ruling on the field is going to be that I agree. I think a C minus is probably right around where I'm sitting for them, just because they did get Aziz, and Aziz is very good.
All right, we'll make that a C minus then. That's a tumble from their original grade from you. Yeah, it's
Full
tough
letter grade
with all
down.
the injuries.
Yeah, and I don't think I weighed injuries as highly in my grading. I mean, obviously I had JC Horn at an A plus or initially, and I think that going back through it and hearing the arguments for the injuries and for docking them because they're injured, I think that it's dropped my grades on a lot of players that just haven't had time to see the field because of injury. It's a little different than players that haven't had time to see the field because of depth chart issues and whatnot.
Yeah.
Um, Now we're going on to Washington, to the Commanders in round 1 at pick 19. They took a linebacker. His name is not Zaven Collins, so that's always a plus. And Jamin Davis, off-ball linebacker. It's always kind of weird to take an off-ball this early, unless there's either a polarizing prospect or that's the only hole your team has, or that's the biggest hole your team has. And not only was Jamin Davis not a polarizing prospect, this was not the biggest hole on the Commanders team by far. The Commanders are, the classic poverty franchise where they have a lot of holes that need to be filled. And while Jamin Davis has played fairly solid, he's played in nearly every game. He started in 15 this past season. He's put up solid tackle numbers. He was top 50 in the league and more. He actually had more combined tackles than Micah Parsons, and they do play very different roles, but he's been a solid, like almost like a Foya Sadaluakon type, where he's just able to hit the hole, able to hit the running back. He's not going to be over athletic or overly athletic. He's not going to be a super good coverage linebacker, but he's kind of good at everything.
So Jamin Davis, he played the 50% of snaps as his rookie, and he managed to actually contribute to the team significantly with that, with the 5th most tackles, and then in year 2 increased that up to an 86% of snap count, and then contributing the most tackles for the team. He's been consistent in terms of the yardage allowed and the TDs allowed, which when you're seeing the increase of snaps increased so much that I see that as an actual plus for him. He has 4 sacks. He's managed to actually produce off of blitzing and managed to get to the quarterback and not just be one of those kind of off-ball linebackers that can't turn the dial up on the speed to actually impact the pass or get to a point and maneuver through the O line. I gave him a B plus. He's not as good as a Pete Warner. He's not as good as other linebackers in this draft, but despite all of their other holes, saw they have a future starter with him. He's not delegated to be a backup. He's slowly gaining those snaps. He's leading the team in stat categories. So, despite all of the other holes, I think it's safe to say that they, other than O line, they might not have actually taken anyone else over him.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think at that position, you're getting to be later in the first round. And if you look at the guys that were picked after him, nobody's going to be a huge difference maker. I mean, maybe Christian Darrisaw, but that's about the only player you can say would be making a big difference there. I had a B on him. I think that because they had other holes, that I graded it like that. But now looking back and seeing, who could have filled those other holes, there's not a huge amount of players that could have. So I think they made the right pick here. I think he's one of the last few players in the first round that I would consider to be like an obviously worthy first round pick. You've got others after him, but I think he's one of the last couple.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Moving forward in round 2, pick 51, you have Samuel Cosme. Um, he's gotten injured in both seasons thus far. He's been good, but he's kind of been unreliable. Um, he started for the team in his rookie year, and he's he kind of was in and out with an ankle injury out of that starting lineup. And in year 2, he got 6 games, but saw more snaps than he did as a rookie, mainly because of you know he he's coming in as out of a backup role for the team and still seeing snaps. So it's difficult to grade him. Um, he's he's gotten slight penalty issues, but nothing great. And he also allows 9 sacks, which also isn't great. But also he's got Carson Wentz behind him. He had he's just had a slew of not great quarterbacks behind him. So it's hard to put all the blame on O line when you have quarterbacks that don't make sound decisions. Um, I gave him a B, but that might be a little generous looking back at it.
I think it was a little generous, especially with the way we just talked about injuries and everything. Um, I had him at a C plus. He had a very injury riddled start to his career. He missed several weeks with several different injuries. He actually, before the season, he won out the starting job at offensive tackle and then got injured, came back to the starting role, got injured again, got put on IR, came back to play a couple more games later in the season, and then he would go into year 2 where he lost the starting job at tackle after yet another injury and then took over as the starting guard before getting hurt again. So with those sheer amount of injuries, I don't think I could go higher than a C plus.
Yeah, I'll lower that to a C plus. Just I didn't I knew about the injuries, but I didn't know it was that terrible for him.
Yeah,
Yeah, the not deserving to be there, especially with the fact that he had to move into the inside to be able to continue having snaps.
now I believe it was because they added somebody to their line. I don't remember what it was, but I'm pretty sure they brought in a tackle that was just like a bit more of a veteran that was clearly going to be the starter. And so when he got hurt and that guy came in and moved up, I think he was just like, all right, where else can I go? All right, guard. Uh, but yeah, C plus for him. I think that he is very good when he's on the field, but he's not on the field often with all the injuries. And most of them have been minor. He's been able to come back from them in the same season and had time to get injured again in the same season both times. So there's always that. But we'll move on from him into the third round. Pick 74. We got Ben St. Juste. He's a DB. He has no picks and started 12 games this past season. Uh, that's not it's never something you really want, but I'll reiterate something that I said I think in our first video that I don't think picks are a great DB number. I don't think you should judge your DBs based on how many picks they get. It's half quarterback, half DB when it comes to those. Uh, the stats do leave a bit to be desired, but you're getting a cornerback in the third round who's getting starts on your team, so I think that's pretty good. And I think you can always get better. And if you're already at the point where you're getting starts, I think you're in a pretty good position.
Yeah, for Ben, he he had this past season. He had a sub 50% completion percentage. He allowed a lot of yards. He allowed 3 TDs. He had 7 pass breakups. It's certainly interesting, um, that past season because you have an impressive allowed catch percentage, but still a lot of yards off of those catches, still TDs. Um, I I I gave him a C plus, but it's 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 an one that I'd be willing to go down on just because of the injury and the lack of time on the field throughout. So like so far throughout the career.
I had a B minus on him. I could move down to a C plus, but I think that his play well on the field, save for interceptions, has been really good, especially out of a third rounder.
All right, I'll match you there. I'll go with B minus.
And then we'll go a little bit later on in the third round. We'll go down to pick 82, where they took De'Ami Brown. And he is someone where I feel like in every single Madden franchise I play, he ends up being good. But in real life, he just hasn't had that same production. You can blame it on questionable quarterback play. You 100% can, and I wouldn't argue. But the stats just don't look good for him. He's shown flashes. He had a game last season with 2 catches, 105 yards, 2 touchdowns. But that's where a majority of his stats came from in that season, and it's never a good look when that is the case. Uh, I had him at a straight C just because I think he can improve. I think he can get better if you have a more solid quarterback, and I think Sam Howell is a more solid quarterback, uh, even if he's not like all-star caliber. But I think he can get better. I
Yeah,
also think he hasn't done enough to solidify himself as a better than a C.
yeah. I also gave him a straight C simply because we have the factors of quarterback. He had a 43% catch rate, but also who was throwing the ball? Were those actually catchable? Um, he he's produced better than some cough Rams receivers,
And really just sending
and
shots at Tutu Atwell, huh?
it's again just it's hard to give him much of a boost. Yes, it's hard to give him much of a bump, so I also just had that straight C.
Alrighty, we
Moving
will.
forward into round 4, pick 124. We got John Bates, tight end. He has 15 starts, and he's got snaps in every single game except for one career wise. And he's been an available backup for to like right behind Logan Thomas. And so, you know, despite not producing on the offense, he's also the second tight end and rarely do those get production. So I had him at a straight B or straight C, sorry.
I had him at a D plus. He's tough to grade because of a lack of starts and a lack of playing time, but he has a solid percentage of targets caught. So
47 times has 34 catches.
so yeah, it's a pretty good percentage when you consider who's throwing him the ball, and we just talked about De'Ami Brown and give him the benefit of the doubt because there's you know a mediocre man throwing him the ball. I had him at a D plus. I don't feel any particularly strong way one way or the other.
I will I'll move it down to a C minus, and I think that's where I'll stay.
I can see
Just
that.
because fourth round is also good to have a guy who's managing to see the field in every single game. He's not practice squatted. He's just simply not having a role because Logan Thomas. And then, do they really pass the ball that much effectively? No. So
I am also interested.
move.
I'm sure the comments will enlighten us if he is more of a blocking tight end as that tight end too. He is 6'6", 260, so he's big, but you know, I don't know if I would think that that's blocking. If he is, definitely let us know, and we'll kind of lighten up the grade on him. Because if he is a blocking tight end, he's a damn good one. He just catches every now and then. That's pretty solid catch percentages. But we'll move forward into the fifth round, pick 163, where they took Derek Forrest. I very much like him and the pick here. He went from starting 0 games at corner to starting in his rookie season to starting 11 games as a safety and appearing in all 17. He made an impact with more passes defended than Benjamin St-Juste, who they took in the third round. He had 4 picks, 2 forced fumbles, and a tackle for loss. I think that this is a very solid contributor to get in the fifth round. I don't think he's necessarily like a Talanoa Hufanga level in the fifth round, but I think that he is very good for the draft position.
Yeah, basically all that you just said. In year two, just the 11 starts, played in every single game. He's the second leading tackler for the team in year two, and he had 4 ints, 2 forced fumbles throughout his second year at safety. He definitely has a big help from all of the stats and all the contributions he manages to put up. Again, I'll agree with you. He's not a Hufanga level, but I think when you consider you have to balance okay, what did he do year one, what did he do year two, and year one, it was a whole lot of not much, and year two was a massive jump. I had him at a B plus, kind of juggling those along with positional value at the round he was drafted in.
I think that so I had him in an A minus, and I think that the fact that he was kind of underutilized as a corner where he didn't see the field much, and then moved to safety where he saw the field a lot, and proved that he should have been seeing the field the entire time. I'll kind of push for that A minus on him.
Yeah, I'll move up with that because it is just something like B plus and A minus. It's a very thin line to try to push into one or the other.
Next up, we have my favorite pick of the entire draft. I've said that a couple times.
Yes.
Man, we got pick 225. We got Cameron Cheeseman. He is in a tier of his own with the name. We've got Stone Forsyth. What a sick name! But man, Cameron Cheeseman, the long snapper. I gave him an S grade.
Yeah, he got a plus for me. He's probably the best long snapper name I've ever seen. His first name could be Camera, and if his first name was Camera Cheese Man, it'd just be perfect. So I think the parents did him a big favor just adding the O N there to make it a normal name. But he's very okay. Realistically,
No, he's an A plus. I
six round pick long snapper.
realistically, sixth round pick, long snapper, name like that, just a classic. He snaps the ball really well. He puts it right where it needs to be in the punter
Yeah.
stance every time. And oh boy, does he get practice with that.
What if he doesn't?
What if he's not on the team anymore?
What if he's actually just a horrendous, like they miss all these kicks and all these punts are muffed because he's not a very good long
All
snapper?
right. Unironically, he has appeared in all 17 games, and he has taken every snap on special teams. Obviously, he's going to be a long snapper, but he has taken 272 special team snaps, and I would be interested to see how many snaps the punter for the Commanders has taken. So I'm going to go ahead and look up PFR Commanders, and I'm going to check out the punter.
I'm so happy that when you type cheese into PFR, he's the only result. Oh my god,
Okay,
I love
so
the cheese.
we've got Tressway is still their punter. I don't know why I assumed it was anybody else. Of course, it's going to be Tressway. He took. Where's the snap count? This past season, he took 146 snaps. Cameron Cheeseman took 145 snaps. Man, crazy. Clearly a very good long snapper. We have talked about this long snapper for way too long. I've
I'm
got
so
him.
glad for this to get cut out.
Oh, it's not going to get cut out, buddy. I've got him at a pretty easy A plus. I'd like to hear your grade for him.
All right, well, taking out the name, if his name was John Doe, you have a long snapper. He stayed on the team. Um, you drafted him, and that's his only role for your team. B.
All right. I'll chill with a B. You know what? I expected an F on the man, so I'll go with that. We'll move off of Cameron Cheeseman. We've talked about him for long enough, and we'll go to William
You
Bradley
sure?
King, D end, picked in the seventh round at pick 240. No meaningful stats. Played 4 games over 2 seasons. Has half a sack, no tackles for loss. I got a D minus on him. I think he's still on the team, and that's the only reason why.
Yep. Uh, and he only had snaps in 4 games. So again, it's just easy D minus there. Still on the team, but underproduced, under seeing the field. Just nothing really to go off of there.
6 picks later, Shaka Tony. Very fun name, by the way. He started in
Very
one
nice.
game his rookie season, which is impressive for a seventh rounder to get a start. He appeared in 16 this past season, 1.5 sacks, 2 tackles for loss. He's more productive than William Bradley King, so it's really easy to compare the two, and they play similar positions of edge rusher, and one of them has more stats than the other. So I went a D plus on him. I think just a half letter grade jump up though is more accurate. So I would see probably a D.
Yeah. I gave him more than just that half letter grade. I went up to a C. He did see twice the snaps, and while not producing that much better, actually, now I'm looking at it, but I'll match you. Actually, I'll just go C minus,
Cool.
unless you want to go D plus.
Nah, I'm good with a C minus. He did outperform William Bradley King, so I'm okay with that. And then we'll go next pick down. 12 picks later, we got Dax Milne, and he is most well known for sleeping with Zach Wilson's girlfriend. He has 15 catches, 120 yards, and 1 touchdown. That's a D. Any input?
Yeah, Dax is he led for the league in punt yards year two, which isn't saying much because he could have just seen on more opportunities, this, that, and the other thing. But the the stats still there, or rather, he led in returns, and he was sixth in yards, and he contributed to the team at all. So I gave him a C plus.
I am actually going to argue against that. I did find that average return yardage sheet, and he is a below average returner. So he is getting the returns, the attempts at returning, but he's not doing very much with them. And even in the seventh round, I think you're looking for a little bit more than that.
What grade did you have?
I had a D. I would possibly go up to a D plus just because he has been that semi-serviceable returner for them. Uh, but
I'll go D plus on him.
okay. So after rounding out that bit of the Commanders draft, we get to their a little bit of a final grade on them. They didn't have any major busts per se. I don't. I think the only person you would think about calling a bust is just like Sam Cosmi, and the only reason you would is because he's been injured so much. But
Yeah,
they've they've got some decent players here. They got Jamin Davis. They got you know Benjamin St. Just was okay. Derek Forrest was a
Eric
good pick.
Forbes,
Uh, and I think they that
Cameron Cheese, man.
Cameron Cheeseman, of course, can't forget. I think that Forrest was a solid value late in the draft, but not a top talent by any means. And I think it's a pretty mediocre draft from a pretty mediocre team. I went with a C plus.
Yeah, I think that DB wise they improved with Derek Forrest and Ben St. Just, but again, it's hard to nail them down as being a above average draft when I mean granted all of their main misses to me at least were seventh rounders, and then you have John Bates and Samuel Cosme kind of underperforming for where we would see them on the offense in terms of snap counts and injury wise for Cosme. I'll go C plus unless you want to argue me down.
No, I'm good with a C plus. That I believe is what I had. Yeah, that's what I had on them. So, um, and then we'll move on to. I was gonna say the star of the show here, but really only one star of the show. We're going on to the Cowboys, who in the first round at pick 12 took the star of the show, Micah Parsons. He's basically the easiest A plus grade you can give, unfortunately. I don't think it's any secret that we aren't exactly Cowboys fans, but Micah Parsons was an amazing pick. He was outside of the top 10 and has just become this all pro edge rusher and linebacker, and he's bulking up to become a straight DN. So I think we're going to see his like full potential this season. But from what we've seen, even though the numbers aren't like looking at a stat sheet, it isn't entirely there. He's not leading the league in sacks or anything, but he's extremely good. He's a dominant threat, and I don't think you can make a better pick at 12.
Yeah, I'm gonna just read out some accolades here, and keep in mind he's on the Cowboys, so there's some popularity contests that tends to happen with them. But 2 seasons, he's gotten 26 and a half sacks, 33 TFLs. He's forced 6 fumbles. He won Defensive Rookie of the Year. He was second place in voting for Defensive Player of the Year both years, and has been first team All Pro. It's insane. Like the main knock I've had throughout all of my grading is first round backers kind of haven't panned out, and it's kind of because they've all been being compared to Mike Parsons. Um, they did not pan out nearly as well as he did, and he is an insane player for them. And he's just kind of increasing his role as a pass rusher as opposed to being off ball. It's the easiest A plus of the draft.
I think in a redraft he would go 2, and the only reason he wouldn't go 1 is because Trevor Lawrence was taken at 1, and I don't
Yep.
think you can ever unseat a generational talent at quarterback from his throne. But I think that
Yeah.
it
It's
would have been more of a
Zach Wilson definitely can be unseated.
yeah, and I think it would have been more of a like 1A 1B rather than like, oh, this guy's clearly better. I think it would have been this team needs quarterback, they take Trevor Lawrence. This team needs DN, they take Micah Parsons. And I am unfortunately excited to watch the Cowboys play this year with him moving full time to D end, and I'm excited to see what he can do. Obviously, the easy comparison to TJ Watt with them both kind of playing the more outside linebacker position. And I think that as a D end, that's what he'll be doing more of. I don't think he's going to be like a full time, like down lineman. I think he's going to be just coming off the edge full time rather than having some off ball uh, play time, which is something that he did and he did very well. But
Before we move forward here, just want to iterate that I really can't wait till we finish the Cowboys so that way I can stop talking positively about any of their players. Um, Next up, round 2, pick 44, is Kelvin Joseph. What did you think about him?
I think you expect a bit more, especially out of a second rounder. He only has 3 career starts. He has 4 passes defended in his career. He hasn't been like god awful, but again, he's a second round pick. You expect way more out of him.
Yeah, he has 7 games where he's actually seen substantial snaps for defense, and outside of those 7 games, he's not seen much of anything. And he's kind of a special teamer. And in the second round, that's not exactly the amount of contribution you want from a player. I gave him a D.
I gave him a C minus. I am pulling up his sheet right now to see why I did that. Um, yeah, I'm not entirely sure. D sounds great to me. And then we'll move on.
Do you want this name?
Huh?
Do you want to say this next name?
Oh yeah. Um,
Practice.
so we'll move on. Round 3, pick 75. They took Osa Odigizua, D tackle. He's very good. He started 17 games last season. He didn't stuff the stat sheet per se, but he performed well enough. He's a true D tackle. He's not a D lineman that shifts around, and he got 4 sacks. He only missed 1 tackle per PFR's advanced defensive statistics, and in all 17 games, that is the stat. And to get a cornerstone on the D line, to get 2 cornerstones on the D line in one draft is pretty nuts, and to get one in the third round is really good.
Yeah. He he's seen the field. He's kind of playing the role of D tackles where he's kind of rotational, and he's he was a lot less productive as a rookie than year 2, as expected. He's a third round pick, and he panned out a lot better than their second round pick, in my opinion. And when you compare him to other interior deep linemen out of this draft, I think it's pretty safe to say that he has got very good value for the selection spot. I give him a B.
Okay. I'm just going to read out a couple stats for him. He had 27 solo tackles, and on the D line, this is this past season, not overall. 27 solo tackles, which as a D lineman normally, when you're making a tackle, it's you're not the only one there. So for him to get a solid number of those is nice. He had 8 TFLs. He had 11 QB hits, and that matched his rookie season total of 11 QB hits. I had an A on him. I'm not going to go down as far as a B, but I think A minus is a little bit more accurate. I really like him. I like the cornerstones on teams and on like in positional groups, and I think that they got that.
I'll give you a little argument here just because of snap count, but even now I can't really get behind the argument there. Like I want to go up, I want to go up to B plus and try to meet you in the middle there, but it's it's difficult with a D tackle, I think, to give him an A. But I'll give you that A minus. I'll sneak into the minuses there. Again, I don't want to talk positively about the Cowboys, so maybe that's some bias holding me back from that A.
He is actually going to be their starting D tackle going into the season, like
Yeah.
DT1, and Mazai Smith, who they took in this past draft, is going to be DT2. So uh, he's very good. I am unfortunately again that Cowboys defense is going to be something to watch, and you know, like I said, as unfortunate as it is, they're good.
Yes, and it is to note that just the year prior to 2021, this draft class we're currently grading, their defense was historically terrible, and in just 2 years to have been able to kind of have a lot of beacons to shine through and have people excited to watch defense is a massive change.
Yeah, they took Trayvon Diggs and Neville Gallimore the year before in 2020, and those are two solid staples. Gallimore obviously been pushed out a little bit just because of Mazai Smith this past year. Uh, but you can, if you're looking at the drafts, you can see that they focused defense heavily in this draft, and it turned out pretty well
Yes.
for them. And then the next year, I mean, 2022 draft, there's not exactly that many notable players, but that's for a different video. Uh, but yeah, they got a lot better on defense in a very short amount of time.
Moving forward into round three, pick 84, Chauncey Golston, who's drafted as linebacker, current DN, so that edge role for them. He hasn't started a game. He has 650 defensive snaps for the team in his career, and to go along with that, he's gotten 2 TFLs and 2 sacks. So it's been a lot of not producing super highly. Um, and then current depth chart also just kind of doesn't leave a lot of hope for him moving forward. I gave him a C minus.
I gave him a C plus, and I'm going to be moving down to C minus. If you look at the current depth chart, he is the right D end number 4, behind Micah, Dorrance Armstrong, Dante Fowler Jr., and then obviously he was kind of a rotational D lineman, only 2 career sacks, and I think that because of that historically bad Cowboys defense, I think that it's kind of just the Cowboys really going overkill with the defensive selections. I think that they could have gone a different direction here in the third round. I think they should have gone a different direction here in the third round. And I think that they're just overcompensating for their lackluster defense with all these defensive picks. Um,
Yeah, it definitely seemed like panic switch got hit, and they just quickly were like, okay, well, we need all of these defensive talents.
and
Start shooting on them.
I can appreciate that somewhat because, maybe Osa doesn't pan out and then you've got this other DN that you drafted, or maybe Micah doesn't pan out and then you've got this other DN that you drafted. And so I can see some times where that can play pay off to kind of draft multiple of the same position, but it did not here.
Moving forward with in the third round, pick 99, Deshaun Wright, DB for the team. Again, another player that doesn't really have the defensive snap counts for them with 219. And last season, 60% completion allowed, had 4 PBUs, another interception. It's it's low it's low production, low snap counts. Um, I gave him a C minus.
I gave him a D plus. He's mostly a special teamer, but he did have a pick last season. And his special teams work has been okay. It's been hit or miss. He had a touchdown scored, but he also had a blunder that gave up a first down on fourth down at some point last season. Overall, he was okay. I think he would have been a much better pick if he was like in the fifth or sixth round, but as a third round player, I think that that's a very solid whiff.
Yeah, and considering position of selection, I would even maybe go lower than D, but I'll just match or well, like D, but I'll just match it with the D plus there.
Alrighty. And then next up, we got Jabril Cox picked in the fourth round, number 115, a linebacker. He, again, is mostly a special teamer, less stats than Nashawn, no starts at all, not much else to say. I've got a pretty easy D on him. I could go down to a D minus just because of snap count.
Yeah, I have him at a D minus. D was what I originally considered, but it's the fourth round selection, and I feel like again the argument for Nishan where it's fifth or sixth, and this is like a little bit better, but right now with you know, D minus, I think fits it better.
On further down in the fourth round at 138, we got Josh Ball, uh, offensive tackle. He was injured in his rookie season, only 41 offensive snaps played this past season. Basically the same thing as Jabril Cox. I'll probably push for a D minus on him as well.
Yep, I'll match you there. Um, Missing a whole year doesn't really help his case. Fourth rounder, just special teamer. It's the highs of this draft class for the Cowboys kind of end in the third round with Osa, and then now we just got a whole lot of defensive fodder and hell, even some offensive fodder that doesn't actually pan out or contribute very much.
Speaking of offensive fodder that doesn't pan out very much, we got Simi Fehoko in the fifth round, pick 179. Another guy, special teams is his main snap count, and 3 catches. It's it starts to become more acceptable for them to be mainly special teamers in the fifth round. Still somebody you hope for more out of. I had a C on him after rethinking grades and such for the past few videos. I think I'm down to a D.
Yeah, I had him at a D, um, because he's not going to be a D minus like the ones before him, considering the fact that he's picked 40 picks later than Josh Ball was, and so the expectations are lower, and it's just he actually had more snaps than Josh Ball and Jabril Cox combined, in terms of playing on the side of the ball that he was drafted for, not just special teams work. So I think bumping him up is an easy thing to do, giving him that straight D.
We'll move on then to Quinton Bohanna, picked in the sixth round, pick 192, another D tackle. He actually did start in 9 games last season, but only had a 30% snap share, only had a single TFL, and the pick doesn't look very good when you look at the stat sheet until you realize you're getting 9 starts out of a sixth rounder. I had a C
Yep.
on him. I think based on how we've been grading, I would say C minus D plus is where his realistic grade is going to be.
Yeah, I think a C just for seeing the field, but also the stats haven't really been there in those starts. His snap counts, again, just to really knock on all the picks prior to this that we have given D's to, he overshadows all of them in snap counts. And coming out of the sixth round, it's something that I would like to give the flat C to, but again, with the snap counts and the time on the field, he hasn't exactly produced enough. So C minus works best there.
We'll move on to the kind of highlight of the later rounds. Round 6, pick 227 with Israel Mukuamu. He was a safety, and in his 3 games started, he got a pick, he defended a pass, and had 17 total tackles. He's, again, mainly a special teamer, but he did put up meaningful stats on that defense when he was given his limited opportunities. I'm going to probably push for around a C plus is where I'm reasonably
Yep.
sitting.
Yeah, I had him at a C plus. Again, it's like very few snaps, and yet this time he's producing with those snaps, and he's also in the sixth round. later than the fourth rounders that we spoke on earlier. So he's getting a significant bump despite lack of snaps and then actually produced on those lack of snaps. And rounding out this draft video, unless you have more to say on this one.
I was just going to kind of say all of these grades are obviously going to be subject to change, especially with the ones that are still on the team. Uh, the only ones that are really not are the ones we've given Fs to, and those are the guys that aren't on the team anymore. Uh, Most of the time, you get a pretty good look at what the players are going to be doing 2 years in, but maybe out of necessity, Simi Fehoko comes in, he starts a bunch of games with a wide receiver, proves that he's really good. So, Cowboys fans, don't get too low in your, uh, you know, feelings about this.
Feels yeah.
Just because they aren't being graded highly right now doesn't mean they can't turn things around. It's just, at this current moment, these have not been good picks.
Yes. Um, Again, we do a little bit of projecting for the future, but when it gets around to these later round guys and they're not projected starters, that's projection isn't so much a factor of it anymore. And then to round out this divisional video, final pick of this video to be graded is pick 238 out of the seventh round. Matt Fornioke,
Farniak, I think, is how
hopeful
I would have said it.
Forniak. That's how we'll blame him if that's wrong. Blame me if I'm wrong. Uh, Farniak is a seventh round guard, and again, another player with a horrendous PFF grade. And
It's a
PFF is not the
39.1.
end all be all. Yeah, it's not the end all be all, but wow.
It's impressive. I always love seeing these grades that are in the 20s and 30s because I'm just like, man, I could be out there doing that. Um, I actually don't
Maybe
think
not
I,
at guard.
yeah, I don't think I could at guard. Um, Matt Farniok is 6'5", 311, so he's got a good, you know, 70 pounds on me. Uh,
It's hard to grade O lineman, and it's even harder to grade a seventh round O lineman. Um, Especially because he's barely seen the field, and he's gotten one penalty, but again barely seen the field. So I just have it kind of matching his PFF grade there. Of I gave him a D.
I give him a D minus. I can see bumping it up to a D just because he started those 2 games, but he started out of necessity rather than out of
Yeah.
winning a depth chart spot. Um, but yeah, getting starts out of anybody is always nice, so I'll see a D there.
All right. So finalizing the draft here, the final grade of the Cowboys draft. Um, they drafted a whole lot of players, 11 picks total, and we can probably argue that two two have been considerable contributors for the team, and Mike Parsons is obviously a highlight of the entire draft class, and it's as in like the year out of the entire NFL, not just the Cowboys. So it's a real balancing act. They missed a lot late. They missed a bit early. Um, I have them at a B flat.
I initially had them at a B plus. That is before I moved down on a couple grades. I had OSAD an A rather than an A minus. I had Israel at a B minus rather than a C plus. Um, I can see a flat B there. I think giving them a very nice bump up due to Micah Parsons is due because later round misses can be waved off as, oh well, they were sixth round picks, they were fifth round picks. But it does still suck to see this large draft class and only have 2 meaningful players come out of it. Um,
Yeah, and it's hard to write it off as late round picks only when you've missed twice in the fourth round, twice. I wouldn't say Chauncey Galston is a miss actually. So once in the third and once in the second. Like you're missing pretty consistently all throughout day two as well. So I think it's it could be argued B minus, but I'll just leave them with that B because Oza and Micah hold it down.
I was gonna say I think B can be a little, or B is a little generous. Initially, after grading all of these, it had seemed like the Eagles and Cowboys were gonna be kind of neck and neck for who is the best draft in this division, but I think it's very clear that the Eagles have taken that cake. And we'll go through a little overview so far of what we have for this division. We started out with the Eagles highlight picks of Devontae Smith, Landon Dickerson, Milton Williams. Those were their first three picks of the draft, and they were all pretty solid. Kenneth Gainwell a little bit down the board as well. And they got an A minus because of those picks. Then we move on to the very strange draft that was the Giants with the highlight of Azeez Ojulari and quite literally nothing else, and a lot of potential that we haven't quite seen yet, with not only players that haven't seen the field, but Kadarius Toney, who was traded for Darren Waller, and a corner that we have not seen play for the Giants yet.
Moving forward into the Commanders here, I I want to just kind of say this as an overview for the entire division grade that a lot of these players have been not seeing the field for either injury or they are rotational guys. And that's a main knock on a lot of these players and a main plus for some of them where they're producing as a rotational guy. But again, this seems to be the draft that I think going through it was the most injured out of any of the divisions.
I think that,
Um,
yeah, I think that can definitely be argued that it was. It was also
yeah,
kind of a, I don't want to say it was a drag to go through and grade, but each team had a lot of picks and each team had a lot of misses.
yeah. So then, just to continue this going, the Commanders came in with a C plus. They kind of had their main hit in the fifth round, Derek Forrest. That was the guy that really caught our hearts. And then, another one that caught our hearts was Cameron Cheeseman, and that's unrelated to his play. I think that speaks for itself. But in the first round and the third round, they managed to get some good contributors with Jamie Davis and Ben St. Juste. So I think C plus is valid there considering the rest of the draft that they managed to have. And then the Cowboys, I'll agree with you for that final grade of a B minus because of the absolute slog that is everyone else other than Micah and Osa. And I think it's best to say that they are a full letter grade below how the Eagles drafted in this draft class.
I think that just to reiterate, the Eagles definitely did have some whiffs. They had a safety in the sixth round that didn't end up staying with the team. They had Taron Jackson, who hasn't made a big impact. But the main argument for them is that they don't have the room on their team for these players to make an impact. They are already a very successful team, where the Cowboys may have some strong spots, but they are not a perfect overall team. And obviously, no team is going to be perfect overall. There's always going to be room for players to step up. But I think when you look at overall roster, I think the Eagles are one of the strongest in the league. So when you've got 10 players coming into the league being drafted by them, you're not going to see all of them have an impact. So it's kind of easy to give them a pass on the players that don't have an impact.
Yeah, and especially with the two names that you said being out of the sixth round versus misses for the Cowboys starting in the second and then the third. It's definitely a big difference in talent available, and you're still managing to come away with the wrong guys. So um, overall, this draft for this division has certainly been we going into it expected a lot more of a battle between Cowboys and Eagles, and when you kind of actually deep dive and look into it, there's a big separation between the Eagles and everyone else.
Yeah.
And a closer argument is Giants and Commanders, and that would have been expected. But Cowboys are really a surprise to me that they managed to be graded so low despite having such a perennial defensive player um, in that first round.
Yeah, and it's always tough to look at a draft where you have a guy who is always going to be competing for Defensive Player of the Year and say that that draft is not good. But I mean, even the Cowboys fans, you gotta kind of see it from the perspective of somebody who doesn't think that every year is your year, and look at this draft class and kind of just shake your head at the sheer amount of picks that you had. Um, but yeah, overall, not a terrible division to grade. Um, I think that could be argued that this is the strongest or second strongest, I guess, in the NFC behind the North. Um, Definitely better than the AFC or the NFC South by a long shot.
Yes.
Um, but yeah, I would just like to thank everybody for watching. There's a link to our Discord in the description below. I'm going to continue to shout that out. Uh, Go ahead and join on that. We will be active in there and listen to all the discussions y'all want to have, and as well as checking out our Twitters. The official account is at tagged franchise. Mine is FTP Anderson.
Mine is FTP Ja.
and thank y'all for watching.
Peace.